Hello there, welcome to the Tea with Jamie podcast. It is Monday, June 22nd. We are in race week in Austria, and it's all very exciting. All right, let's do a little bit of a news roundup at the beginning of the week. We can talk about anything that came in over the weekend and any little updates that we have for this upcoming race. So let's kick off with the weather conditions potentially in Austria, which is potentially going to be the hottest race of the season. Now, I believe, I'm on the east coast of the US right now, but I believe the west of Europe is experiencing somewhat of a heat wave right now, and that includes Austria. So this is an article on Racing News 365. Weather warning issued as Austrian GP set for brutal conditions. So a weather warning has been issued for the Austrian Grand Prix, and some expecting temperatures to surpass 40 degrees Celsius. Now let me do a quick conversion. That is 104 in Fahrenheit for all you old school. So it's going to be hot. And they're up in the mountains there. Is the Austrian track at altitude? So yes, I believe it is at about 2,500 feet above sea level. Now that means thinner air, and it also means it's harder to cool because of that. Now if you remember, I remember a bunch of years ago, the Mercedes had a real hard time with cooling, and they would cut the top of the engine cover off. They literally shaved off the top and just exposed the whole top to cool the engine down, allowing the heat to get out that way. So I wonder if there are going to be overheating issues, particularly with potentially the battery. The batteries are a big issue these days, right? Because there's just so much more reliance on them. Obviously, the brakes, that's an obvious thing. They open up the brake ducts as much as possible. And I would say less with the ICE, because the ICE is putting out less than it has done in the past. So that's probably not going to be a big issue. Presumably the radiators are an appropriate size for the ICE, and all the ventilation and the airflow and all that kind of stuff and the cooling. But I worry about the electrical side, and I worry about the brakes. So yeah, this could be a big story. Reliability could be a big story. Overall cooling could be a huge story in terms of that. Also, of course, just on the drivers, right? Austria is great. It's got a couple of sections where it's not relentless like a Monaco or a Singapore. There's lots of opportunity to sort of catch your breath. That final sector's quite nice and action-packed. There's a decent sized straight. There's that section from turn 1 all the way up to turn 3, which is not much brain activity and physical activity. There's not much to do there. You got the big, I always get confused as to remember which is it, turn 4? Let me have a look at a track map. It's the one that, there's all the action at the top of the hill. Let's see. Turn 3, yeah, the top of the hill. And then turn 3 is a big opportunity for overtaking. Turn 4, big opportunity for overtaking. And sometimes into turn 1. But that whole end of sector 2 into sector 3 is just sort of a bit of a procession. That should be fun in their cars this year. The fact that they can follow down the straight means I think we're going to get a decent amount of action into turn 3 and potentially into turn 4, potentially before turn 3 even, because I don't know where the overtake mode zones are and where the detection zone is. I'm assuming probably between 9 and 10, somewhere like that, ready for the start-finish straight, and then those 2 big overtaking opportunities. But in terms of what I was initially talking about, the heat of it all, there's lots of opportunity to recover. It's not just this relentless onslaught. So yeah, the weather's going to play a big role in this, and it's who can keep the cars cool and who can keep everything in the correct operating window, I think. Also brutal for the fans. That's quite an exposed track for the fans. These big old grandstands without any covers on them. And, think about the Marshals with all their fireproof equipment on. And we're gonna talk about Marshals in a bit. Yeah, we'll get to that. So yeah, heat is going to be the big thing in Austria. Brutal heat. Okay, let's move on to F1.com and some quotes here by Toto Wolff. And he's talking about the rules of engagement between their two drivers. The article is, Wolff considers Mercedes' intra-team rules amid Hamilton and Ferrari threat. So, while the Mercedes were bickering in Spain, Lewis won the race. Now, ultimately, of course, for Kimi it didn't matter because his car went kaput anyway. But for George, potentially could have cost him the win. However, they messed up his pit stop and got his wing wrong, and he didn't look like at all a threat. He was overtaken by his teammates. So I think in reality, they had bigger problems than some squabbling on track. However, Wolff sees the writing on the wall here. If they are going to be on the track at the same point multiple times over the course of the season, this could really hurt their title challenge, both for constructors and for the drivers. And, given the same opportunity, i.e. tyre life, i.e. both cars operating in the window that they should be operating in, they look like they're both very competitive and on a similar sort of track in terms of performance. So the likelihood of being, qualifying close together and then being on track, a similar part of the track at the same time, is pretty high. So they have to really sort this out outside of the car in order to not allow other people in. Now, they, of course, don't want a Spain 2016 situation to happen where it's not just them costing each other time, they take each other out. I mean, it came very close in Canada, right? A couple of times. So, while it's relatively amicable right now, this, a storm is quite clearly brewing here. So anyway, let's get some quotes by Toto on this subject. All right, this is to do with Spain. By Toto Wolff. They raced each other quite hard before George's stop, and I think we lost 4, 5, 6 seconds to Lewis. And then obviously with EVSC, it changed the order. We tried to race fair in the team game, but maybe it cost us the win today. And that's something we need to discuss with the drivers. How are we doing it if we're fighting somebody else for the race win? We're leaving lap time on the track, and we need to discuss with them for the future. And then later, Wolff added, I've always said that there is a third party now getting involved in the championship fight, constructor and driver. And in that respect, we will discuss internally with the two drivers how we want to handle a situation where we risk holding each other up. And I think it's not going to be a problem. It's just maybe we need to recalibrate. All right, so the fact that he's saying that publicly is interesting, I think, because if it wasn't a problem and it's a simple recalibration, why talk about it in the press? I think maybe the fact that it's being talked about in the press, i.e. like right now by me, amongst many other people, he thinks it needs to be expressed that they are aware of it and are dealing with it. Now, as we know, it's one thing to sit down in an air-conditioned conference room and have a calm discussion with the drivers. It's quite another thing when you're in the heat of battle at 100 degrees on the track, driving at 200 miles an hour, millimeters away from each other. What happens then? Now, Toto is a fairly formidable chap, right? I mean, he is not going to take any funny business. So those drivers need to have the fear of God put into them, right? That they cannot cost the team points. It's all very well them fighting with each other and wanting to get one up on each other, but not at the cost of team points. Because the team is more than just the two drivers. They're obviously the figureheads of the team, and they're out there, risking their lives, putting their lives on the line, admittedly because they want to and because they're paid very, very handsomely for it. And it's, that's no one's forcing them to do that. However, they have to play the team game ultimately, because there is like 1,000 people, or however big that team is, 1,500 people who are investing all of their time and focus and energy and brain power and commitment and passion into that team too. And for their individual driver egos to disregard that is just not fair. It's not fair, it's not right. And as a fan, we just want to see the battling on track, of course. Like, we don't see the bigger picture. But if you're Toto Wolff, you are representing everyone from the person that sweeps the floor right up to the person at the top of the podium with the trophy in their hand. So every part of that process needs to happen, from the floor being swept to the driver crossing the finish line. Every part of that process needs to work together cohesively, and they need to be part of the team, and they need to feel that they're included and respected. And I think that's a big part of why, in the heat of the moment, these drivers need to remember that, Anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a rant here, but I have great sympathy for these drivers when they're in that incredibly high pressure, high excitement mode that they're not necessarily thinking that pragmatically. Of course they're not. This is like top tier performance, full tilt, flow state business, right? But anything they can do, anything that Wolff can do to solidify that into their brain so they can consider these things, even in the most high pressure situation. I guess it's a similar situation in any application where it's a very high stakes scenario. You can't just lose your mind and just be like, well, anything goes. Whether that is business or like paramedics or like in a war situation, the military, like you can't just forget your training just because you're in a high stress situation. You rely on that core training, right, to carry you through in those extremely stressful situations, heightened situations. Okay, so that's going to be interesting to see. This is going to be a big story of the season, right? How do Mercedes deal with their drivers? Because I don't think either of those drivers are going to give much quarter to each other. And it's all very well them shaking hands at the end of the race, but if they've been both cars, everyone else in that organization is going to be miserable. Let's go to planetf1.com. Actually, let me go to youtube.com because I want to talk about something else other than Formula One. I want to talk about, now let me get this pronunciation right. So I want to talk about Moto GP and Marco Bezzecchi. I think that's how you pronounce his name. That's what I heard someone on a video say, so blame the video person, not me. It's been a while since I followed Moto GP, but at the Czech Grand Prix, he goes off the track into a sand trap, right? Into a gravel trap, sand trap, into a gravel trap. And he comes off his bike, bike's on its side. A bunch of marshals rush over. They pick the bike up. Oh God, this is shocking. This is so ridiculous. As the guy's picking the bike up, one of the marshals is picking the bike up, Bezzecchi comes over, shoves this guy in the face, like trying to push him away by pushing him in the face. Not his body or anything, not trying to just move his body. He literally manhandles the guy in the face. So disrespectful. The rider then goes and adjusts the bike a little bit. The marshal's just standing there. Bezzecchi stands up again and slaps the marshal around the face. He went berserky. Absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Remember, these marshals aren't paid, as far as I'm aware. This is a voluntary thing. They're there putting their lives on the line, let's be honest. Rushing out, trying to secure the bike. I think I heard a quote from him saying, the marshal that is, as he was picking up the bike, he revved the bike a little bit, just because his hand was on the throttle, as he was picking it up. And that's what made, apparently, Marco Bezzecchi see red. And, yeah, absolutely insane. And what was the punishment? He was banned from the race on the Sunday. Oh, wow. What a punishment. How's he ever going to recover? You cannot strike a marshal on the face twice. Imagine a football player hitting a ref. Remember when, what was his name? Oh, God, the Italian guy pushed the ref over and the ref fell over in a really comical way. Paolo something, I'm forgetting his name. Di Canio. Paolo Di Canio. That was his name. Anyway, you can't manhandle marshals when they're just doing their jobs. And he was out of the race. It wasn't like rushing to, not that this would be justification, but he wasn't rushing to get on the bike to get back in the race or anything. He was out. He was just standing around. And the marshal did something, like rev the engine a bit, that just caused him to lose his mind. To be fair, Bezzecchi apologised, and there was footage of him apologising to the marshal after the race. I think that was after they... the team Aprilia, however you pronounce it, were like trying to... I guess they were trying to like argue their case or something. I mean, there's no argument. They have to just hold their hands up and say, our driver was completely out of his mind, and this is unacceptable. We don't support that at all. We support absolutely a full-throated punishment. So yeah, I know this isn't Formula One, but if you haven't seen it, I mean, look it up. It's absolutely atrocious behaviour. So yeah, I wonder what would happen if this was Formula One. I mean, I find it very hard to imagine it happening in Formula One. I don't know why. I mean, I guess, I don't know. I guess it could happen in Formula One. Why wouldn't it? But, yeah, wholly unacceptable. So disrespectful. Speaking of what we were talking about a minute ago with George and Kimi in the heat of the moment, all right, that's one thing. When you're fighting with your teammate and you're both sort of out there on the track and you touch wheels, that's bad enough already. But going out and then running over to a marshal, pushing him in the face and then slapping him around the face, oh, ridiculous. Anyway, let's move on. I do kind of think this guy needs a bigger punishment than one race ban. That's absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. Anyway, and this guy's leading the championship, by the way. So, I don't know what a fair punishment is, but that seems like an easy let-off. All right, let's move on. So there's an article here on Planet F1 called Carlos Sainz Makes Intriguing Max Verstappen Red Bull Contract Claim. This is by Jamie Woodhouse. So this is nothing to do with whether or not he stays or goes at Red Bull. This is just a tiny little contract-specific story here to do with Max Verstappen's contract. And it's to do with Sainz making this interesting claim. So it was brought up to him that it would be fun to go back to the old Elf Masters indoor karting competition. That's where the F1 stars competed in a competition in go-karts. This ran between 93 and 2011. And it's great because, now you're on equal or much more equal machinery. You can actually see what the pecking order is, right? And who's great at it. Sainz said basically, with this 24-race season and all the requirements that the drivers have to do media and press and all that kind of stuff, it wouldn't be possible to bring that back, even though it would be absolutely amazing. And that could be a whole other broadcast avenue for F1 and Liberty Media, right? I think that would be huge. Imagine that. Let's bring that back. But he thinks it's impossible to do because of all the other responsibilities that the drivers have. According to Sainz, though, and this is a quote, I think that in a 24-race championship with all the marketing and interviews we do, that's impossible. No driver could manage it. Well, Max would be the only one because he's the only one who doesn't do marketing or interviews. He has it written into his contracts, he can afford to do so, and Red Bull accepts it. As for the rest of us, we simply don't have the time or the free capacity to put our energy into a race like that. So it's a tiny little thing, it's a tiny little snippet, a little window into Max's contract. He obviously does do press, you see interviews with him, and he does do Red Bull marketing. He does videos all the time with them. I see them. But it's not in his contract. That's the thing, right? I'm sure he gets maybe additional funds, or he just does it because he slings them a bone every now and again, right? He does stuff for press because he knows that yeah, I think I should go to the pen. I think at the race weekends, there's like a Formula One rule, right? That you have to go to the pen and speak to the press. I don't think that's necessarily a team rule. So I think he has to follow those rules. But all the extra stuff that they do for sponsor events and all that kind of stuff that all the drivers have to do, apparently except Max, he does on a more of a voluntary basis rather than a contractually obliged basis. So, yeah, interesting little insight there. If that is still the case, I mean, let's remember that Sainz hasn't been Max's teammate for, I mean, how long has it been? 10 years? Max's first race in Red Bull was 2016, so almost exactly 10 years. So, yeah. So Max moved up to the Red Bull, and Sainz stayed where he was, if you remember. And that was one of the big reasons why Sainz left Red Bull. Okay, that was a fun little nugget of news. So speaking of go-karting, this is traditionally the path in for racing drivers. However, in autosport, there's an article here, Hamilton demands action to tackle ridiculous cost of motorsport. So, we're in interesting times now because, yes, to do actually the motorsport, i.e. get in a vehicle and drive it around a track, it is much, much, much harder than it ever has been unless you're rich or you have rich backing. According to this quote by Verstappen, he said, "The problem is the prices are just going through the roof. People are paying £10,000 to £12,000 for a round in minis. That's just insane, these kinds of prices. That is limiting sometimes some real talent that does not have the financial backing to even reach it to Formula Racing at the moment. That's why I think it's important to also explore just outside of go-karting, or at least I can already see a lot of kids that are still go-karting, they are also racing on the simulator. They are learning to drive in F4 cars or GT cars. With how accurate simulators are, you can already be 10 steps ahead in terms of your preparation before you jump in a Formula car." End quote. So that's what I mean. On the one hand, it's harder to get in a machine and drive it around a track. And on the other hand, if you can afford to get at least rudimentary controls and an Xbox or a PlayStation, right, you can actually learn the rudiments of driving a Formula car at home on a simulator. Or maybe you got some friends and you can pool your resources and you can get some kind of rig to learn this stuff. So on the one hand, it's harder than ever. On the other hand, there are ways in. Also, I guess there's the aspect of, if you include things like streaming and the social media side of things, maybe self-financing your way in is an option while you learn. You know, with esports and all that kind of stuff, there are people that stream and compete professionally in the esports arena that could potentially fund their way in, right, by earning some money doing that while they practice. So we're in interesting times in terms of the next generation of Formula drivers, whether that is Formula 1 all the way down to Formula 4 and regional. Could they jump straight from the sim into Formula, bypass karting altogether, and once they get over the shock of their safety being on the line, their actual muscle memory and their ability and their reactions have been honed so that they could compete fairly quickly? I can see that absolutely being the case. Absolutely. So it's an interesting time for that. Okay, and I've got a recommendation here for an article that I'm not going to have time to read, but it's an article in The Race. It's called F1 Engine Games Have Immediately Become Absurd. And I would advise you to read this. It's by Ed Straw. And he really does highlight how insane it is that the teams are now arguing with each other over who has the worst power unit or the worst internal combustion engine of the power unit in order to get access to this ADUO. And the potential for fun and games, and as with all Formula One, gaming of the system in order to like hobble your ICE in order to get the advantage of an ADUO. And so what isn't normal is that with the complexity of Formula One, this is a rather simplistic or overly simplistic solution to levelling out the power units because it seems like there is an opportunity here to exploit it in a way that would actually exacerbate the problem rather than fix it. So, I'm not going to go into this because I don't have time. I've got an appointment at 9 and it is 8:50 right now. But I would definitely advise you to read that article, and it's something to think about. And I'm sure probably in 27, I mean, it might be a bit too late by then, but at least next year, I think Formula One, or the FIA, should I say, will have actually fixed this and maybe tightened it up, made it a little more specific as to what is tested, what you can change, when, and maybe it is a little more nuanced. Because right now, it is actually potentially making the situation worse rather than better. So anyway, check that out. I will be back tomorrow with more news. I'm sure we'll have a lot of news as it's race week and the teams are making their way to Austria. And yes, as per usual, if you can leave me a review, a nice review on Apple or Spotify, I would greatly appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, thank you to everyone that has. I like to read them out every now and again. And rate the podcast, share the podcast if you can, or at least talk about it. I'm going to actually include more podcast content on my social channels. I'm F1_Jamie or Jamie Muffet on the various platforms, Instagram and TikTok, and YouTube on my main platforms. I also have a Facebook page, which I don't really check all that much, but stuff gets posted there and stuff gets posted on Thread. So, stuff's around. I've got it all synced up to sort of auto post it everywhere. When I post it on Instagram, this is a bit of unnecessary behind the scenes, but when I post on Instagram, it also posts on Facebook and Thread. So that just automatically happens without me doing anything. So anyway, I don't know why I'm telling you that. We are going to be back tomorrow. So have a great day and I'll see you then. Okay, bye-bye for now. I've been your host, Jamie Muffet. You can find me on social media for more of this rambling nonsense under my name or F1_Jamie. This is an RPS audio production.